Inspire-Bite. Today's topic, food security, and we don't just mean making sure your flatmates haven't stolen your milk.
Food security is one of the biggest issues facing our modern world today. With a current population of approximately 7.4 billion people, food demands are projected to increase by 40% by 2030 and 70% by 2050.
The other pressing issue surrounding this question is the impact that global warming will have and is already having on crops worldwide. Currently, 70% of the world's water usage is used in agriculture. With temperature set to increase, droughts expected in some countries and floods in others, how will agriculture be impacted? Claire shows us the importance of climate change.
Thank you, Emily. Now I'm going to talk to you about some facts and figures. This is a graph showing predicted population growth of the human race between 1950 and 2050. As you can see, in more developed countries, population mainly stays constant throughout the 100 years. But in the less developed countries, population has a rapid increase. One of the factors that may lead to this is contraception is widely available in these more developed countries, but not available at all in the less developed. Another factor is the lifestyle. Less developed countries are highly dependent on crops and agriculture, and therefore they need more children to help them bring in the food. Another factor is education. In more developed countries, education is widely available to all people, including women. This may lead to them having children later on in life, and therefore they aren't physically able to have as many. The population has been growing since 1650, and in recent years it's been growing by 1.1% every single year. So why is this? This is because we have eliminated many limiting factors. This has been done by medical advances, it's been done by general improvement of hygiene, and also an increased expansion of the human habitat. The humans are now able to live in places such as Dubai, which used to be a desert, and they're also able to live in the polar regions. This is due to the invention of heating and air conditioning. But when will the increase stop? Well, scientists have predicted that the increase of the human population will stop at around 10 to 15 billion, but who knows? Sea level rise is a result of global warming. As you can see on this map, this is a prediction of the end of the 21st century. And 95% of the ocean coverage is thought to rise by up to 0.8%. This graph shows the three main greenhouse gases. These lead to the greenhouse effect, which is thought to lead to climate change. As you can see, between 1970 and 2010, all three main greenhouse gases have increased. They've gone from increasing 1.3% per year to a massive 2.2%. This may be due to a number of factors, including the ongoing burning of fossil fuels and the growth in the human population. So what's this going to do to food security? Well, the climate change is predicted to cause global warming, and the global warming will mean that plants that grow in an area at the moment may not be able to continue growing there. This will alter the distribution of the plants and lead to a shift in agriculture. It may also lead to an increased spread of disease, which can kill off many crops. If a region is dependent on these crops, it can lead to starvation or a major impact on the economy. I'm going to finish off by talking to you about the predictions for future yield changes. At the moment, the increase in yield outweighs the decrease. However, by 2090, the prediction is that the increase in yield is going to be dramatically smaller than the decrease, and therefore the food production will plummet. Thank you very much. Now over to James.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, we are seeing some concerning predictions. The UN's annual report found that 1 billion people are undernourished. To talk about the issues in agriculture, Eleanor talked to Tracy Lawson of the University of Essex. Here is what she had to say.
So what do you feel is the biggest threat to food security?
I think there's several threats to food security. A number of different things. First of all, land use, change in land use. So it means that we don't have as much area to grow food on, or we're definitely not going to have more area in the future to grow food. I think that changing climate, so for example water availability, changes in temperature will have an impact on crop productivity. And crops have actually plateaued at the moment, so there's a desperate need to find or have inputs into breeding programs to find crops that can produce greater yields, and we've sort of reached a plateau in breeding, so we need to find other techniques to address those issues.
What particular projects are running now to help combat these?
So globally there's a lot of different projects and research projects all over the world that are trying to look at ways to try and address food security, and a lot of that aimed at trying to produce plants that are more productive or able to cope with the changing environment that might be an issue for productivity. So for example, research here at Essex is focused very much on trying to improve photosynthesis. So a lot of that work is led by Christine Rains in the department, trying to manipulate enzymes within the carbon cycle to improve the carbon cycle and try and improve crop productivity photosynthesis that way. But there's also projects looking at how well a plant absorbs the light energy, and is there ways to improve the way that the light energy is used for photosynthesis to improve the crops, right down to major big initiatives that's trying to put, for example, C4 photosynthesis into rice. And one other approach is that there's a lot of projects now looking and screening for some of the natural variation. You know, we've bred a lot of our crops for yield and one trait only, but have we missed some of those traits that could help against various different stresses, etc. So going back and looking at some of that natural variation, some of the wild type plants, and seeing if we can look at some of that genetic diversity and put that into our breeding programs is another way forward.
So will there be any positives to come from climate change on agriculture?
So there could be positives with climate change. So for example, increasing or elevated CO2 in the atmosphere will benefit some plants. So it will benefit C3 plants, not C4 crop plants. So C3 plants will gain from that increased CO2 and have better photosynthesis, which hopefully could help that plant to grow and produce more yield. However, on the downside of changes in climate change is temperature changes, which could influence that CO2 gain that you might get in the C3 plants by the fact that temperature would hamper their photosynthesis through processes such as increased photorespiration. And then the other big change with the climate is changes in water availability. And of course some areas might end up with better precipitation patterns, which might make them more suitable to grow certain crops, whereas other areas might end up with less water and have drought situations. So there'll be changes in the way that crops can be grown in certain areas of the land. So for example, Northern Europe is predicted to have more rainfall, so that might be better for crop growth, whereas Southern Europe might become more droughted. So there'll be maybe separations of areas. Adverse effects of climate change will probably outweigh the benefits of it, most likely.
Okay, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me about this. It's very interesting.
Yes, as Tracy mentioned, plants are going to be greatly affected by climate change. In order to produce maximum yield, optimum conditions are required. Water, CO2 concentration and temperature are among the big ones. One point she briefly touched upon was that plants may experience an increased level of photorespiration due to a temperature rise. Photorespiration occurs when rubisco, the plant's most abundant enzyme, binds preferentially with oxygen over carbon dioxide in the beginning stages of the Calvin cycle. During photosynthesis, two molecules of glycerate 3-phosphate are created when ribulose bisphosphate and CO2 combine with the help of rubisco. However, when photorespiration occurs, only one molecule of glycerate 3-phosphate is created. Glycerate 3-phosphate is an intermediate in the Calvin cycle which is used to produce useful sugars for the plant's growth. Photorespiration primarily happens in C3 plants, which makes up about 85% of plants, including most seeded crops such as wheat, rice, potato and soybean. A rise in temperature has proven to increase this process, even with increased levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. Back to you guys in the studio.
Yes, this process can definitely be damaging. We have seen that even a rise by 1 degree can cause a 5 to 10% reduction in the yield of major cereal crops.
Global and regional weather conditions are expected to be even more variable than the present, with increases in severity of extreme events such as flooding, droughts and hailstorms. This can have a direct effect on land conditions that are needed for proper crop growth.
Land in the sub-Sahara will be exposed to the highest level of food instability, given that it's already a country undernourished. Similarly, with ice caps melting and sea expansion due to absorption of heat, flooding of low-lying farmland could see countries such as Bangladesh lose half their crops, with just a rise of 1 metre in sea level.
So, how is this to grow more crops on less available land? One common practice already in action is semi-dwarfing. It was introduced in the 1960s during the Green Revolution to stop the lodging of crops and increase plant yield.
Well, as Tracy mentioned earlier, there are a lot of experiments going on globally to help combat plant stresses. For example, looking into the more fundamental elements of photosynthesis, such as the enzymes involved. By genetically modifying plants to have increased enzymatic activity, we may be able to increase photosynthesis. For example, a paper published in 2005 by Stephanie Leverbe concluded that by increasing levels of the photosynthetic enzyme SPCase can increase levels of photosynthesis in tobacco plants.
So, with experiments like those here at Essex, is there an upshot? Some predictions remain optimistic. The temperature rise could mean there is a shift in agriculture where plants such as citrus fruits are grown north of their original location. IPCC still have a predicted rise of 5 to 20% in agriculture. However, without another green revolution, there will be a serious pressure on food demand. That was the latest from Essex BioBite.